안녕하세요. 여러분의 한국어 선생님 고빌리입니다. This is the second episode in my series where I analyze the Korean speaking of the group ATEEZ, an 8-member group that debuted in 2018. Last time I started with the captain of ATEEZ, Kim Hong-jung, and today I'll be sharing my full analysis of another member, Park Seonghwa. But first, if you're new here, I'm a Korean teacher. I've been studying Korean now for 2 decades and teaching it here for over 12 years. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the Korean speech of Seonghwa, including any unique expressions or any dialect that he uses, and giving my professional analysis of him as a Korean teacher and speaker. But first, I want to say thanks to this video's sponsor, my Patreon supporters and channel members. The reason I don't have any sponsorships in these videos is because of you. And if you would like to help support my channel and to help me keep making more Korean language content, please consider becoming one of my Patreon members or channel members. And there are links in the description box of this video. As a member, you'll also get access to bonus content like Korean cheat sheets, lesson outlines, and worksheets, and you'll get to help choose the next group that I analyze in one of these videos. So, without further ado, here is my analysis of Seonghwa.
Hi, my name is Seonghwa.
Seonghwa was born in 1998 in the city of Jinju, which is in the south of Korea. And although he and Hong-jung were both born in 1998, Hong-jung was actually born in November and Seonghwa was born in April, making him the oldest in the group. And with that extra age, I'm positive will come extra wisdom, growth as a person, and maturity. I'm just joking. He actually is very mature and his Korean gets pretty eloquent sometimes.
자, 시작. 신촌 샹송쇼를 샹글릴라 호텔에서 여선진 샹송쇼 맛있겠다.
Come on, Seonghwa, you're not helping my analysis here. Now, I said that he's the oldest member, and in Korean culture, if you're born even 1 year sooner or later than someone else, then even if you're friends, you'll still use the terms hyung if you're a male to refer to an older male friend, or the word 누나 to refer to an older female friend. And that's regardless of really how close you are as friends, and the members do this too, usually. And here's a quick example of some short letters that the other members wrote to Seonghwa. And I'll talk about the angry bird in a moment, but most of the other members who are younger than him refer to him using the word hyung, so older brother, except for Hong-jung, who's the same age as him and can refer to him as 너, meaning you. And also San, who jokingly calls him seong-hwa playfully and draws an angry bird face. And also Mingi, who jokingly calls him no, despite Seonghwa being a year older. Now, I should note that this is not the norm for regular friendships in Korea. If you are friends with someone in Korea and they're older than you, even if you're good friends, you wouldn't call them no, since it would be considered impolite. But there is an exception. Actually, there are a few exceptions. The first being if you're in a relationship with someone, you can call each other however you prefer. And another being if you're a direct family member, which is why, although you should always speak politely to older adults, many Koreans will actually tend to use casual speech toward their own parents and siblings, regardless of their age. And that's exactly what ATEEZ does. They're not technically family members, but they do live together and work together and even sleep together sometimes.
하나, 둘, 셋. 잘 자고 오늘 고생했어.
So since they're already acting like a real family, they also speak to each other more like a family. Note, however, that this is only in their private lives, so just in more casual situations, whenever you see them appear on like a TV show or if they're like announcing something official for an event, they mostly go back to the proper formalities, which means that they're going to still speak slightly differently toward each other depending on the year that they were born. And this is like you would in any regular friendship in Korea. Here's a quick clip actually of Seonghwa using all 3 major politeness levels at the same time, the 요 ending, casual speech, and then formal speech.
벌레 안 무서워하시는 거 알죠? 그래, 자고 있는데 이랬대요. 바퀴벌레가 지나가잖아.
진짜 울음 터집니다, 진짜.
His first sentence uses the yo ending, so the standard polite ending that you'll use most of the time. And then his next sentence is in 반말, which is casual speech. And his last sentence ends with the 니다 form, which is formal speech. And this might seem unusual if you're not familiar with exactly how politeness levels work in Korean. But because they're all like family and because they can normally speak casually to each other, Seonghwa and the other members as well are able to use pretty much any of the politeness levels and verb endings whenever they want in order to convey whatever feeling that they want to add to their sentences. And politeness levels in Korean, while there are a lot of rules you have to memorize to using them, it's really more about the feeling that they give your sentences. But I should note that even if you're family, you still shouldn't speak casually toward grandparents or aunts or uncles because that would still be considered rude. Now, back to the angry bird for a second. There's a little story about why Seonghwa is the angry bird. And I have a really short clip of this.
윤호가 저를 딱 보고 제가 그때 노란 옷을 입고 있었어요. 근데 그 사진 딱 갖다 놓으면 이렇게 탁 옆으로 형 이거다. 형 닮은 사람 찾았어요.
하나, 둘, 셋.
And I'm embarrassed to admit this too, but when I was first trying to learn how to recognize the members' faces, I also used this angry bird drawing to help recognize Seonghwa in video clips. So nice job, Yoonho, for coming up with that appropriate nickname. Although I can't decide if he reminds me more of an angry bird or if he reminds me more of Toothless. But Toothless is not his only nickname, which I want to talk about next. Another nickname that he has that fans might know is Mars, like Mars the planet. And there's a very simple reason for this because seong-hwa, his name backwards is Hwa-seong, and Hwa-seong means the planet Mars. In fact, his YouTube videos also use the letters M-A-R-S rearranged into ASMR, and he even used to make ASMR content on YouTube a few years ago. Another thing that I noticed was he also seems to be a huge fan of Lego as well as Star Wars.
짜잔. 어서 오시게.
Now, Lego I get because Lego is popular all over the world, but I don't know many Star Wars fans in Korea. And not only that, but did you know that Seonghwa also even enjoys cleaning? And he seems to be really good at it too.
바닥을 돌돌이부터 쓸어요. 그다음 청소기로 먼지를 그다음 제거한 다음에 그다음 뭐 물티슈 그다음 또 마지막으로 돌돌이를 해야 좀 이게 편한.
So basically, Seonghwa is a bit of a nerd, and I can respect that. I mean, you have some Lego stuff here. But there's a reason that I brought all of this stuff up, and that's because it reflects not only on his personality, but also on the way that he speaks Korean. As the oldest member, he originally acted kind of like the mom of ATEEZ, as the other members would all look up to him and even Hongjung. And Seonghwa would help to control the group at least as much as was possible. And I think being the oldest member somewhat helped lead to him speaking in a unique way from the other members. And I have a few clips to share, so let's take a look at the first one.
안녕하세요. 종이의 나라 오신 걸 환영합니다. 제가 혹시 뭘 하면 될까요?
Here, Mingi was just goofing off, and Seonghwa ignores him, and instead he replies seriously to a worker. And his tone when he responds, it sounds soft and direct. It just sounds simple and kind. And the more episodes and videos that I watched with him, the more that I noticed this. Seonghwa speaks very eloquently. His word choice, how many words he uses, and his voice tone, everything is like that. And overall, he just has a calm, soft, and friendly way of speaking. And here are a few more examples.
그래서 오늘 라이브는 이제 여기 준비된 성화 PDR을 작성해 보면서 다시 알아보며 시작을 해보려고 합니다.
But it's not just the volume of his voice that makes it soft. The words that he's using are also welcoming. He ends his sentence here with 시작해보려고 합니다, which uses the 니다 form, which is a formal ending, but this formal ending is actually misunderstood because I know that many beginners think that the 니다 form is overly polite or that it's only used in formal situations, but it's not really. It feels respectful. And when it's used sincerely, like he's using it here, this form makes his sentences sound like he's respecting the listener. And not just that one sentence, but he uses this form a lot, I saw. Pay attention in this clip as well, where he's just making Legos and talking to his fans.
건강보단 동수비 우선이요. 농담입니다. 건강이 우선입니다, 여러분들. 덕분에 재밌게 만들고 있습니다. 감사합니다.
This is one reason why I also like teaching the 니다 form, even though it's not the most common form that you'll hear, because when it's used correctly, it gives your speech a respectful tone. And I love how Seonghwa uses it so naturally. It doesn't come across as overly formal or distant. It just sounds like a part of his character. But on that note, his sentences are also very long, I noticed. He tends to make longer sentences. And it's not just the length, but he's eloquent and really, he picks his words carefully. Like, listen to this example where he connects a bunch of sentences together into one very long sentence.
인지를 못하고 있다가 저는 하나씩 무대를 곱씹으면서 이제 모니터링하고 좀 부족한 부분이 있을까 하면서 하다가 뭔가 전체적인 그림을 보다 보니 후렴 들어가는 노래가 정말 많더라고요. 그래서 뭔가 제 노력도 있었겠지만 그래도 저를 믿고 이렇게 해주신 분들이 있었기 때문에 가능하지 않았나 생각이 듭니다. 감사합니다. 항상.
Just a few endings I want to highlight here. 못하고 있다가 and 있을까 하다가. This 다가 ending is used to show that something happens while something else is still going on. So it's like saying while I was and then continuing on, and he makes really long sentences like this often. But he's not rambling at all, and everything that he says connects and makes sense. And then the last part he says, 가능하지 않았나 생각이 듭니다. 생각이 듭니다 means like I think, and it comes from the verb 들다 and that formal ending 니다 that I mentioned. And saying 가능하지 않았나 is a negative ending and it means it wasn't possible. However, here it's actually being used to mean it was possible. This is there's a separate grammar lesson. Maybe I can talk about this in a different video. But this ending 나 together with 생각이 듭니다 is an indirect way. It's a soft way of saying, I get the feeling that perhaps. So he's not saying directly just, I think. It's a really soft way of speaking. And Seonghwa's speaking is full of these sorts of soft grammar forms, so it makes him sound more eloquent. Like in this clip where he's just finished filming for a music video and he's expressing his thanks to the other members and saying how he enjoyed the filming and how he feels happy to be able to make the album.
앨범에 넣을 수 있어서 진짜 좀 너무 고맙고 좀 뿌듯하고 저 스스로에게도 좀 도움이 많이 됐던 그런 촬영이었던 것 같아요. 진짜 어떻게 나올지 정말 기대가 됩니다.
After watching him a lot, I get the impression that he's someone who's just open to talking about his personal feelings, that he expresses himself and isn't afraid to speak openly and honestly about his emotions and his opinions. And if you watch any of his live streams, you'll probably notice that too. And he often talks about things that are on his mind or things that he's feeling, like in this clip here.
저는 항상 제가 26밖에 살지 않았지만 인생은 선택의 연속이라는 생각이 들어요. 선택. 그거 하나에 내가 이 평생을 이렇게 살 수도 있고 그거 하나에 내가 정말 후회를 하기도 하고 그런 것 같아요.
인생은 선택의 연속이다. Life is a series of choices. This is the kind of deep stuff he talks about right after playing Animal Crossing. So I've talked a bit about his speaking, and now I want to talk about his writing. And you probably won't be surprised to hear that the way he writes is just like his speaking times 10. So let's look at one of his letters.
자, 에이티즈한테 편지를 담아서 잠깐만 여기 혹시 넣을 수 있나?
not a Lego letter, but let's look at some letters that he wrote to ATEEZ, and he writes a lot of those letters. Actually, let's first look at one that he wrote to his own parents, I believe from 2022. And this is a letter that all the members wrote, and he wrote it as if it were his last letter before leaving to travel into space. And my first impression is, whoa. He has some nice cursive. Look at how tall his syllables are. In the first line, we have 사랑하는 엄마, 아빠, meaning to my dear parents. So his syllables are stretched out vertically a bit, but this is also a common style, and I think it looks cool. And I really like the first full sentence that he writes. 19, 작은 캐리어 하나 들고 집을 나서던 아이는 이제 더 큰 세상을 항해하려 합니다. The 19-year-old child carrying a single small suitcase and left home is now sailing toward a bigger world. And let me just tell you that his Korean in this letter is like poetry. But I don't think that he's trying on purpose to write it like poetry. This is just how he normally expresses himself. Then toward the end of this letter, he writes this. 부디 건강하시고 이 아들 무사히 제 눈에 아름다운 지구를 우주를 담아 무사히 잘 돌아올게요. Please stay healthy and I will return safely with this child, meaning with your son, since he wrote it to his parents, filled with the universe and the beautiful earth in his eyes. And this whole letter is written in normal Korean. Now, he's not using any strange words, but just the way that he writes is like a poem. Now, I want to translate every single line of his letter, but I have still so much more to point out. So on to the next letter. This is a letter that he wrote to Yoonho. So we'll get to see how he writes towards someone who's his friend and also a year younger than he is. 우리 윤호, 언제나 긍정적인 모습으로 항상 잘 지내주어서 고마워. My Yoonho, thank you for always keeping positive. But the way that he wrote this makes it seem much softer and more poetic than just saying maybe something like this. 항상 긍정적으로 잘 지내주어서 고마워. And I wrote this sentence and it means the same thing and would be a more common way of saying it. But Seonghwa's way is a lot softer and more poetic sounding. And so we've seen how he writes now to his parents, and we've also seen how he writes to another member. But let's look at now how he writes to his fans, because it's even more like this. This is a letter that he wrote to ATEEZ, I think back in 2020. And right away, I noticed his choice of stationery paper. You know you're going to get some poetry when there's a flower and a rabbit that takes up half of the page. And I just want to talk about a few parts here because it's long. So look at this part here. 이번 생일을 통해 서툴지만 제 안에 있는 가장 따뜻한 마음을 여러분께 전해드리려고 해요. Through this birthday, I want to share with you the warmest feelings in my heart, although they're a bit rough. And the word that he uses is 서툴다, which is kind of like to be unskilled at something or that something's a bit rough. So while his entire letter is written very eloquently, he still calls his words a bit rough or unskilled. So on top of everything, he's also humble. And before we go to the next page, I do want to point out something that's, I guess it's related, but his handwriting itself, actually his handwriting, surprisingly is pretty rough. He writes quickly, I can tell. And he doesn't clearly make his syllables distinct sometimes, especially his consonant lir, which is the L letter. Look at the word 사실 here. It looks like he wrote the consonant 디귿, which is the D letter, and he writes it like this in several letters that I read. You can also see him rushing a bit whenever he writes the consonant 미음, which is the M letter, like in the word 그만큼. And right below it again, 못할, and again, 만큼, and 너무나 right next to that. Every time he writes this letter with the second stroke connecting to the start of the third stroke, so it ends up kind of looking like an English letter R. And this is a completely normal thing to do in Korean, and it's especially common when writing quickly. And I just think this is really funny because not only is Seonghwa eloquent when he speaks and when he writes, but he just does it so effortlessly. He's clearly writing fast here, and he doesn't seem to need much time to think about what he wants to say. So I'd say that he's a pretty natural poet, whether he thinks so about himself or not. Okay, now on to the next page of this letter, and we'll see just a little bit more. Toward the bottom, there's a sentence I like where he says this. 어쩌면 여러분이 매일 저를 생각하고 또 며칠을 고민해서 전해주셨던 그 예쁜 마음 덕분이었을 거예요. Which means perhaps it was because all of you thought of me daily and because of the beautiful thoughts that all of you had shared with me over the past few days. And he's saying this in reference to what he thinks caused him to change over the past 3 years when he wrote this letter. And really quick though, on the last page here, he also writes this. 그래서 저도 부끄럽지만 이 자리를 빌려 말씀드리고 싶어요. 고맙고 사랑한다고. So although I'm shy, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you and I love you. And he uses this expression here, 말씀드리다, which is an extra polite version of 말하다, meaning to say. And this verb 드리다, which is what's called a humble verb, meaning it's kind of like the speaker is lowering themselves down. And in this case, Seonghwa is lowering himself below his fans. So even though this letter isn't written formally, all of the endings are actually in the standard yul form. So it's just the normal level of politeness. And it therefore sounds friendly. But because he's still using humble speech and also honorific speech, it really elevates his writing and it makes the whole letter sound not just friendly from using the yul form, but it also makes him sound humble. Okay, I think we've covered his writing enough, so next I want to talk briefly about his use of dialect. You all know the song The Real. I listened to it a few dozen times while writing this video series, and what Seonghwa says here is this. 이런 게 바로 멋인기라. In standard Korean, this part would be 멋인 거야, but in his dialect, 거야 becomes 기라. And really quick, I want to comment on the translation of the song title, The Real. Because while the real represents being real or true to yourself, the song's actual Korean title, 멋, is a regular noun that means style or fashion or coolness. And it's used in the common expression 멋있다, meaning to be cool or to be stylish. Now, Seonghwa was born in the city of Jinju, which is in the same area of Korea as the city of Busan, known as the Gyeongsang province. In fact, Yeosang as well as San are both originally from that same province, although different cities. And Jinju has dialect, and Seonghwa even lived there through high school until he debuted. And if you pay close attention, he'll often use some of his dialect. If you can recognize the intonation, it's usually the biggest giveaway that he's speaking in dialect. But if you can't, then just pay attention at least to the ending of his sentences. It's common that when he speaks in his dialect, he'll end his sentences with the plain form. Really, basically, that just means his sentences are going to end with 다. Here's an example.
너무 좋다. 아, 또 바다 향기 맡으니까 좋네. 오랜만에 바깥 공기 쐬니까. 아, 에이틴이 보고 싶다. 저희 팀명이 정해지고 바다에 왔는데.
In this clip, he uses dialect for a bit and then switches back to standard Korean, which is what you'll hear him and the other members use most of the time. But he seems happy and willing to use dialect whenever anyone asks him to. And here's another clip of him and San acting out a wake-up call using dialect. And they recorded 2 versions, one where they act tough and one where they act kind. So first, here's the one where they're acting tough.
일어나라. 안 일어나. 퍼뜩 일어나라.
씻어라 뭐 하는데?
몇 번 말하노? 사랑한다 애가. 얼른 일어나. 우리에게 얼른 일어나.
빨리 일어나라 보고 싶다.
The verb ending you're hearing the most is la, which is an ending for making a command. And it's a common ending that you'll also hear in regular Korean too, but it tends to get used more often in this dialect. It's kind of like a strong but friendly way to tell a close friend to do something. Okay, now let's hear the clip where they're acting kind and pay attention again to the endings.
해가 떴는데 왜 안 일어날꼬?
보고 싶다.
사랑한대.
자기야 뭐 하는데?
일어나래.
In addition to the common 다 ending that I mentioned before, you'll also hear 대, like when he says 사랑한대. And since they're both from that same province of Korea, a lot of their dialect will sound similar. And this isn't going to become a full dialect lesson because there's a lot more going on with what he's saying. But here's just one more clip.
아, 떡볶이 맛나네. 불스부시로 만나는 냄새가 난다.
Here he uses the ending 달, which can also be used like the ending 다. And it's funny because even the person writing the subtitles didn't know what he says. I think what he says is 벌써 무시로 만난 냄새가 난다, which means already it smells great as always. And the reason it was hard for the person who edited the video to even hear him is because of his intonation, which goes up and down a lot more when he's speaking in dialect. Anyway, the last thing that I wanted to briefly talk about is Seonghwa's usage of filler words, or should I say his surprising lack of filler words, because besides just one word that I noticed him using a lot, Seonghwa doesn't fill his speech with unnecessary words. He's just a naturally talented speaker and he keeps his sentences very clean. So I did say that I noticed one word he uses often, and here's that word. Actually, see if you can find it in this clip. Well, in several clips.
저는 그러면 이제 씻으러 가보겠습니다. 씻고 이제 메이크업하는 모습을 조금 찍어보도록 할게요. 저희 콘서트가 이제 정말 얼마 남지 않아서 그럼 전 이제 자러 가볼게요. 그래서 저는 이제 뭐 힘들 때나 좀 그랬더니 이제 팬분들께서 아니 치우고 씻으면 이제 오늘 일과는 끝입니다. 이제 밥을 먹어보도록 하겠습니다.
It's 이제, which we also saw Hongjung using as a filler word. It's a really common one. 이제 means now or from this moment, and it's a normal word that you can use to mean that something's happening now or that you're going to do something now. And it can also be used as a filler word, meaning like, now I'm going to say something, so listen to me. But it's not an especially fillery filler word. It also does add meaning to the sentence. So yeah, it's a filler word, but he's not really overusing it here. So I think that this just further proves how much of an eloquent speaker Seonghwa is. Because while filler words are actually super useful for making your Korean sound more like a native speaker, and I personally recommend using filler words as long as you're not overusing them, being able to speak without leaning on them at all and then still sound completely fluid and still making really long natural sentences really earns him some bonus points here. So excellent job. And if you're looking for an ATEEZ member with proper speech, tone, intonation, formality, and all of that, someone you can use to help improve your Korean, then look no further than Seonghwa. He gets my Korean teacher's stamp of approval. Okay, and I could keep going on, but we still have 6 more members, so that's enough for today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and also subscribe to my channel for more Korean learning content. Thank you again to my Patreon supporters and channel members. And if you would also like to support this channel, you'll find links to my Patreon page as well as how to become a channel member in the video description box. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time. 그럼 다음에 또 봐!